Hello, hello. Welcome back to Life After Plus One. I'm Leanne, your podcast host and your single parent mentor and coach. And today we have a juicy episode where I'm talking to Krystal Johnson. Now, she is a divorce lawyer, and I'm going to hit her up with some of the most common questions that are out there in the world of single parenting when you're about to go through your breakup. Now, we cover everything from AVOs to supervised visits to custody to settlement, living together with your ex, and what to do when you're wanting to leave, how to go about it. So all of these juicy details and more are included in today's episode. And if you're wanting some details on Krystal, you can find all her details in the show notes below. She is also offering a free one-on-one consult if you have any quick questions that you do want to bring up with her. And so that is all in the show notes where you can find her website and her contact details. So get ready for today's episode. And go grab yourself a coffee, or hey, you may even need something a bit stronger for this one. And grab yourself a drink, come sit down and listen in as we discuss those big, heavy questions that you go through as a single parent when you're tackling the legal system. Welcome to the Life After Plus One podcast, where we turn life's lemons into delightful lemonade. Get ready for inspiring stories, uplifting conversations, and all the tips and tricks to rock your single parent journey with style. I'm your host, Leanne, and it's time to embrace the adventure of Life After Plus One. So let's dive in. Okay, so today we have Krystal Johnson here with us from Ryan and Ryan Lawyers, and she's going to talk with us about some of the nitty-gritty details about the legal sides of breaking up as a single parent and some of the things you need to be wary of when you're going through your breakup. So I'll introduce Krystal for you if you want to say a little hello and give a little introduction of yourself and what you do.
Thanks, Leanne. So obviously my name is Krystal, so I'm a family lawyer with Ryan and Ryan Lawyers. I'm also a single mum, so I'm blessed to have three beautiful little children. But I've also been on the other side of it. So I've been through divorce, I've been through financial separation, I've been through the ups and downs and roller coasters of co-parenting and navigating that sometimes difficult journey as well.
Yeah, it is. So you were in this before you were a single mum?
That's actually, yeah, a single mum before I became a lawyer. So I had to navigate through this. I was going through my law degree, but I had no idea the challenges that I would face.
Oh, so you were
So
single parenting first before you got into this?
that's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. Okay. Yeah.
I think it's helped me a lot in what I do now because it provides that understanding and the other side of it, the human side
Yeah.
to lawyering that we don't often see.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really, I think when you're going through something, it's really refreshing to have someone that's actually understanding of what you're going through and not just someone that's there just reading papers and they've just read it in a book. It's like they can actually empathize with you and get where you're coming from.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's a horrible feeling when you're going through this and you often feel alone.
Yeah.
Like it's one thing to have someone tell you the legal side of things, but when it's not tailored to your personal circumstances or it's not taking into account things like narcissism or abuse
Yeah.
or anything else like that, it can be really difficult to try and tell your story to that person and really get into the nitty-gritty of that
Yeah.
story.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I know when I first broke up with my daughter's father, he was, your prime narcissistic character. And it wasn't such a thing back then. Like, because we've been separated for, gosh, nearly 11 years now. And it was very kind of, it wasn't spoken about like it is now. Like you hear that word thrown about everywhere, narcissist, narcissist. But back then when I would tell my story, you just feel like you're lying to everyone because it was just so crazy, the things that you go through. But now like people are more understanding of it, and having someone like yourself that's been in that situation it would make it so much easier for that person that's going through it as well.
Well, I certainly hope so. Most people that come to my office end up in tears, and I almost end up in tears with them too. Because,
Yeah.
having someone actually believe your story, it's a big thing because
Yep.
you get to the point where you're so self-doubting and you think you're crazy in your head. And like you just identified too, it's like, how could this even happen? And when you verbalize them words, it sounds crazy to yourself, let alone
Yes.
expecting anyone else to believe you.
Yep. Yeah, that is so true. And that happened to me on multiple occasions where I tell my story and I'd sit back and think, I'm like, how are they even going to believe that? Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Well, let's get into what to do. So when you're just going through a breakup, or maybe you're still with your partner and you're wanting to leave, but you don't know how, you don't know what to do, you don't know where to start. What are some of the things you should do first?
The very first thing you should do is go get legal advice. A lot of firms will offer like a 1 hour consult, at a reduced rate. The reason why you should go get legal advice, even before you actually pull the plug or leave a relationship, is they'll be able to tell you, based on your individual circumstances, whether it's best for you to stay in a property, for example, the suitable arrangements for children, what you may be entitled to. Often, we think about leaving a long time for up to 2 years before we actually finally leave a relationship. And that leaving can sometimes be so abrupt and so
Mm.
quick. It could be the cause of one final argument, and you just get out the door.
Yep.
Having that knowledge behind you before you pull the pin is almost essential for forward planning in that smooth breakup period. So just having someone there to go, like a bit of a direction, and to know what, for example, you may be entitled to in property settlement, to know that appropriate age plans are what the courts deem to be appropriate parenting plans for the children of certain ages and everything as well. Knowing whether it's okay to, relocate quickly, because sometimes if you have to leave a relationship in a hurry, you might go, okay, well, I'll just go stay with mum in another state. Knowing whether that's going to be accepted by the courts, or whether that's
Yep.
something that you may have to come back. But yeah, that legal advice, initial legal advice, even if you don't end up following through with the breakup down the track, just knowing where you stand in the eyes of the family court is really beneficial.
So, for those people that may have done it already and are actually going through a process of divorce as we speak, and they haven't done that, they haven't got advice beforehand, and they've done some things, you know, are they going to shoot themselves in the foot? Like, and some people might not have the money to be able to go speak to someone. What happens in those situations?
Well, it is a hard one, like because often the first thing we do is we Google. We Google and we talk to our friends, and
Yep.
we might talk to people that have been through it in similar circumstances. So we take on their advice on board, but unfortunately, that can actually, like I said, you
Yep.
can end up shooting yourself in the foot by doing that. Um, if you're in that position where you've started down that process already, there are some free services available that you may wish to utilize. If you qualify for legal aid, you've definitely got to hold a legal aid. But otherwise, like, to do that research, have a look on blogs of law firms too. A lot of law firms, if you're going to get information from somewhere, look on law firm blogs. So a
Yep.
lot of firms will do free blog posts about property settlement, about parenting, about that kind of stuff. But there's really nothing that can't be um, dealt, like, undone, kind of thing.
Okay.
You can always go get legal advice down the track, and sort of get back on that direction. But the main thing is, if you're sort of going along down the track, and the other party, for example, has engaged in a lawyer, just, being always courteous and replying to that lawyer as well, to a certain degree. Like, don't stick your head in the sand, don't ignore lawyers' letters.
Yep.
Um, a lawyer's letter has no control over you. Like, if you receive a a letter from the other party's lawyer, it has no control over you as such. Like, it can't direct you to do things. Only court orders have that control. But it's always good to provide a response to the lawyer,
Yep.
keep following through.
Yep. Okay. So it's not too damaging for someone that has got up and left, and like they're not it's not damaging for them as such in their situation if they've just left without getting advice.
No, it's not. I mean, it's always better to get advice,
Yeah, of
but if you,
course.
for example, had to get up and leave, like, the legal system is the legal system, like in family law. Like, there are steps that need to be followed no matter what. Like, it may cause delays. So if they, for example, upped and left, and left the family home or the family property and everything, it may impact their case by not, seeking legal advice prior. But the fact of the matter is, the end result will still be there. The house will need to be divided
Yeah, of course.
appropriately and everything else like that. So there's nothing, that really can't be undone to a certain degree, obviously, depending on the circumstances. But the more informed you are prior to going into this situation, the better you're going to be.
Yeah. And I think that's a thing that we see quite often. And I think people are getting more educated on this topic where they are planning ahead. But I know, for example, like with my situation, I just, many people stay in these relationships because you just want to make it work. You do what you can because you think if leaving, you're a failure. You don't want to just get up and do that. So you do what you can to make it work, not planning that it's eventually going to fall apart because you just keep hoping, no, we're going to work, we're going to work, we're going to work. But then eventually you get to breaking point. It's like, I'm done. And then you're out. And then you haven't taken that advice because you're just like thinking in your head, it's going to work eventually. We're going to make it work. But it doesn't happen that way.
And it's so overwhelming too. Like, 'cause when you think about leaving, like often we look at family law as a big bunch. You know, you have your property side of things like division of assets and the house and, super, all that kind of stuff. Then you have your parenting side of things like what's going to happen with the kids. And then we have this overarching term, which a lot of people use, like divorce. And they think divorce encompasses everything else there. And it doesn't. There's three separate matters that need to be dealt with. So often when we're looking at this as a big whole, it's so overwhelming. And
Yeah.
so hard to separate all that. The thing to know is each of them individual things, divorce, parenting, and property, they don't have to be necessarily dealt with all in the one big hit. You can have a property settlement and deal with that first. And then you can, in the meantime, have a parenting plan going with the kids that might be quite fluid, that you can change over the course of the years. And divorce, obviously, you can't get divorced until a year after separation anyway. So it doesn't need to be all dealt with at once. You can break it up into smaller pictures, and that sometimes makes it a lot easier to deal with in the long run.
Yeah. So what about those, okay, so you're dealing with a stay-at-home mum, for example, and she's in a situation where she thinks, oh, I'm not going to get anything. I'm just a stay-at-home mum. What advice do you have for people in those situations that are maybe in a lower financial position than what their partner is? Do you have any advice for anyone in that type of situation?
Yeah, and it's a sad mindset to think like that, like
Yeah.
the so the family courts view being a stay-at-home mum, a homemaker, the primary caregiver to the children, they view that as a high level contribution. So if
Okay.
the other party, like in again, not to genderize, but if dad's going to work, he's paying all the bills, doing all that kind of stuff. Mums, they're looking after the kids. Someone has to take either of their roles. So the courts view them quite similar. They're
Okay.
both contributions. So just because mum's staying at home and she may not be paying the mortgage or, putting money in her super, it doesn't mean she's not entitled to a portion of the house or a portion of the super received from dad.
Yeah.
Um, because obviously dad's going to work and has the ability to do that and then that super. So
That's an interesting point, and that was actually going to take me to a question I was going to ask later down the track, but I'll ask it now. What do you think of those? Okay, I don't want to be gender specific here, but I kind of will relate it to what we were just talking about. Say, for example, you've got a stay-at-home mum, and then you've got the dad thinking she's taking me for everything, and you've got all this gender hate going on because all these men think all these women, and again, I'm not gendering like blaming anyone specific because it could happen on both sides. But what's your opinion on those kind of situations where you have a lot of people hating on the opposite sex because they just think they've ripped them off and taken them for everything?
no, it's a really, really hard thing, and often, like when you come into a relationship with someone and you decide to have children with them, it's all about us. It's all about no, this is our house, this is our child, this is our money, and then all of a sudden when it's separate, it becomes, well, hang on,
Fine.
my house, this is
Yeah.
my child, this is
Yep.
my super that I earned, so if you can hold on to that our mindset that you came into and realize that both of you, both of you made a decision to have a child. As part of that decision making, one party decided to stay home and care, or it was decided that one party would stay home and care for the child, and the other party would continue
Yep.
working. There's benefits to both. There's no wonderful, both things have, you end up exhausted. There's no good or bad or right or wrong as to the decisions made there. However, the stay-at-home parent loses the ability to earn super while staying
Yep.
at home.
Yep.
you know, like and the person going to work all of a sudden has this little nest egg for when they're older. So that's why it needs to be divided. Like, you know, it was a choice that both of you made, you know, for one party to stay home, one party to keep working. So it is something to keep in mind, even I suppose prior to having kids, that, you know, like you've made this decision together. Here are the impacts of this decision together. You know, the super earned whilst one party is staying at home and looking after the children or raising the children, it does need to be considered as being joint, you know, in a way. Like if we can change that mindset slightly, I think it's going to be a lot easier
Mm.
when any kind of separation.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a big thing as well. You see that so much these days, and people are like, I'm not getting into another relationship. They're just going to take me for everything. And it's such a common theme out there these days. And it's so heartbreaking. It's like they're not just taking you for everything. It's not just like some court has to just turn around and said, yep, here, that give them everything. They're given what they're entitled to.
Well, that's right, exactly. You know, like and like again, it's that hurt that comes into it becomes
Yes.
out. It's mine. This is mine, and you're not being taken for everything too. Like you look at most, you know, single parents. You know, none of us really go, you know, have expensive hairdos or go get our
No.
nails. And kids are so expensive. You know,
Yes.
you're not being taken for everything. Half of that stuff is going towards your kids' sporting events. You know, lunch boxes, drink bottles, everything else. You know, it's just how it is. Like that money is going towards your children, you know. But yeah, just snapping out of that mindset, you know, otherwise, yeah, just don't get in a relationship from the start. You know, everything that you get into, like if you choose to get married, if you choose to have children with someone, you have to adopt that our mindset. And
Yeah.
that mindset needs to continue on until after separation as well, because it becomes your property, not just, oh, yeah, both parties' property.
Yeah. But see, that's the thing though. That's our mindset quite often doesn't. As soon as that breakup hits, it's me, you, and it's that whole tit for tat mentality. And that's where a lot of the issues come in. Like people are just like, no, we're not together anymore. This is me, this is you. You can sort yourself out. And it happens a lot. And to be honest, 11 years on from my breakup, I deal with that a lot. Like my ex is now refusing to pay school fees and it's just I'm constantly trying to get him to be on board, but he's like, nope, I pay child support. It's like, well, it's just that mentality. It's just like, well, it's not about me. You're not helping me out. You're helping your child out. And it's getting that mentality doesn't often stay where it's that our mentality. Let's do what's best for the kids. Quite often that hurt and that damaged ego is always going to get in the way of looking after that our.
That's right. And a lot of the time too, I find we have very different views on what's fair. You know, one party might view things being fair as going, well, like you mentioned with the child support, I pay child support. That's fair. That's all the money that you should have to raise this child. Everything else shouldn't count. Or, you know, we should go halves in everything, and that's fair. And without realizing that one party might be on 150K income, but the other party might be struggling with 60K. You know, in that situation, going halves for everything isn't fair. You know, it
Yeah.
doesn't make up that. And like you said, you know, like the hardest part for people to really do is focus on their kids. You know, like a lot of these things aren't benefiting one party or benefiting the other party. You know, one thing I often hear is, well, why should I have to pay the
Yeah.
kids with me? And it's like, well, you know, but you both chose to have the kids. You know, you both were in that situation. If the children were with you most of the time, you wouldn't be able to work, you know, anyway. Yeah, just keeping in mind that, you know, you both reached an agreement at some point, or generally.
Yeah.
We do have some lovely surprises that, you know, pop around sometimes, but you decided to have children, and that decision doesn't end at separation. You know, when
Yeah.
you have kids, your parenting role doesn't stop just because the other party is caring for the children.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the sad mentality that a lot of people have. It's like, well, I pay child support, you're good. I don't have to do anything more. But we need to find a way where we can get it where it's not about you're not financially providing for the other parent. You're providing for your child.
That's right, exactly
Yeah.
right. You know, and it is heartbreaking that, you know, it is that view. You know, there is that
Yeah.
stigma, especially against single moms, that,
Yeah.
you know, she'll use it for her nails, she'll use it
Yes.
you
You
know.
see that so much on Facebook, and I cringe every time I see it. And they think that they just go out and get Botox and get their nails done and get their hair done. Like, seriously, I'm not lying. I haven't had a haircut in 2 years. It's
Oh my
because
God. Messy bun. My nails are all
yeah,
terrible.
it's so no same.
Yeah. But we can't, like, you can't afford it. Like, you can't afford that lifestyle. Simple, like, but then they're also forgetting that, they're whinging about paying child support, but they're also then going and, buying new toys for themselves, whether it be, boats and everything else.
Yep,
There's no complaints there. We are allowed to spoil ourselves every now and then, both
exactly,
men and women. We're allowed to, do that kind of stuff as long as we're not neglecting our child's needs, and we're not,
exactly.
not, I'm going to say, skimping out on paying for things that are important to them first. But aside from that, if there's anything else, we should be allowed to.
Yeah. And that is part of the horrible stigma, isn't it? It's like single mums are frowned upon if they want to do anything nice for themselves. It's like, how
Yeah,
dare you? You should be spending that to the kids. But other dads, I mean, again, I shouldn't put that comment out there saying like hating on dads for doing that. But there is a lot more of that stigma that is directed to single mums, let's be honest. And you don't see any judgment or stigma on dads that go out and buy these nice things. Why is it just on the mums? But that is a horrible stigma that's out there, and hopefully that can change someday. But I feel like it's just getting worse and worse with social media.
it is, and you feel guilty. Like if you decide to go, get a haircut or do something, like, like you're like, are people going to judge me now for,
Yeah, yeah.
like, it's an interesting, yeah, and sad, a sad way that we live like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is sad. And I saw, like, off topic a little bit. I did see a social media post about a week or two ago. It was a mum. She's some reality star, and she was out having a night out. And someone commented, "How dare you be out without your kids?" And I'm like, well, would you say that to the father? How dare you be out with the kids? Why is this just a mum shaming thing? It's such a horrible stigma that's out there. And it's, like I said, I feel like it is getting worse these days because of social media.
100%. And we sort of need to change that view, both men and women. We all need to, work together and change so much the stigma that's
Yeah.
associated with being a single parent, because you know what? It's really, really hard. Like, it
Yeah.
is one of the hardest things. It's so rewarding. Don't
Oh,
get me wrong.
100%.
But
Yeah.
men hard. Like, and I have a lot of, female and male single parent friends, and they all agree, we have their moments where you're just so tired and so
Yep.
burnt and everything else. And we really should be banding together here and, trying to remove that stigma, trying to create a village and trying to support each other, rather than going, oh, I hate women because blah, or I hate men, they're all the same, like,
Yep.
and we're all single parents. And that's what we really got to focus on, doing what's right.
Yep. Yeah, and that's funny you say that because I had someone comment on one of my posts just yesterday, and they made a comment just hating on women or something. And I said, no, it's not. I don't take hate on my page. We're all here in the same boat. We're all going through a breakup. There's no, why can't we just support each other? But anyway, we've gone off topic a little bit, so I'll get back on. So, okay, let's go back to when you're dealing with settlement, custody, all these kinds of things. So, what do you have any tips when you're going through that, and when things aren't going your way? What advice or what tips do you have for when you're trying to navigate this part of the breakup?
Don't make any decisions in the moment. Okay,
Yep.
that's the worst thing you can do. Like, when you're feeling stressed and anxious and everything else, we tend to want to be reactive. We tend to go, okay, you know what, forget about it. I won't, like, you can just have the kids. I'm not going to fight anymore. Like, I just give
Yep.
up. And I see that quite a fair bit. And it's like that moment that you write that message, all of a sudden, like, it's not game over, because you can come back from it, but gosh, it will make things difficult for you. There's no decision that can be made in family law that has to be made instantly.
Yep.
Take the time to think it through. If you have one party pressuring you, saying you need to sign these orders, or you need to do this, or you need to, agree to this parenting plan. Take the time to say, hey, I really need to think about it. I might need some advice, and then think about it. Take the time, at least a week. Don't rush into anything. The other thing too, which I'll touch on with, especially with parenting plans and care arrangements for children, it's always good to try and keep a mindset, especially if you have young children, of fluid parenting arrangements too. There are different ways to resolve things in regards to parenting there. So you have a parenting plan, which is not binding. So it's just an agreement between the two parties. The great thing about parenting plans is they can be fluid, so they can be adjusted, or new parenting plans can be created, as the children get older. Then you've got consent orders, which is pretty much a parenting plan agreement reached, but it's stamped by the court. So this is binding. And
Yep.
then the other side of things, going to the other extreme, is you've got orders made by the court in regard to the care arrangements of the children. Again, it's binding. If you can, parenting plan is definitely the way to go to keep that fluid mindset. But again, like I said, don't rush into any decisions. Don't feel like you're pressured into any decisions, because a lot of these things can be final, whether it's property settlement, parenting arrangements if they're through the court, or even divorce. Everything can be final. So make sure you take time to really think about it, and not just jump on the instant.
Do you know what though? It's funny you say that, because we can both look back at it now and say that's what you need to do. But when you're in that moment, that's probably the last thing that's on your mind, because you're in fight or flight mode. You're stressed, you're thinking, you're on edge, and you may have an ex that's manipulating you or trying to encourage you to do things, and you're just reacting in the moment. And it's hard just to kind of stop and go, you know what, I just need to stop and think about what I'm doing. Because when you're thinking like that, you're going through the most stressful thing you're ever going to go through in life. And then you've got to make these huge life-changing decisions. It's like, how can you even make that when you're not even thinking straight yourself? I mean, it is so important to step back, but when you're thinking like that and you're just so wound up, stopping and having a break and clearing your head is probably the last thing you're going to think about in that moment. So it's really hard to do that unless you've got a good support network around you.
100%. And like you just touched the nail on the head there, get that good support network. If you're going through a separation, don't be afraid to go get counseling, or don't be afraid to go get, some sort of,
To myself.
yeah, a lot of people are afraid to go do that because they're like, what if this
Yes.
comes against me in my parenting matter? What if I, go do that and I'm seen as being crazy because I'm seeing a counselor? Counselors are the most useful resource, and I recommend them to everybody that comes into my office. The courts will look at any work you're doing on yourself as a benefit.
Yep.
You're there going, hey, you know what? I'm going through this really hard time. I've got depression, or I've got anxiety, or I've got this. This is what I'm doing to work on myself. This is what I'm doing to better myself, to be the best parent I can be. It's
Yep.
only going to work in your benefit there. It's such a good tool to have, so don't be afraid to surround yourself with them sort of supports as well.
Yeah. And there is, again, a shame that comes with that as well. Oh, I don't need the help. I'm fine. I can do it. But really, you're going through the hardest thing you're probably going to go through in life. And quite often you're doing it alone.
Yeah.
You lose your support network, and quite often you're embarrassed to talk to your close friends about it, especially if they're all married or they don't know how to give you the right advice. So speaking to someone is really the best thing you can do. But so many people feel ashamed or embarrassed to do that.
That's 100% right. What we are seeing now, and and I thank social media so much for this, is an influx of different groups, like support groups that may not be, sort of, official, or, counselors or therapists, but they are people going through similar situations. So for men, we have amazing groups like Dads in Distress.
Yeah.
I think there's a really good one popping up on the coast. Talk to me, bro.
Yes, I've been to a few of their events.
Yeah, oh, fantastic. There's one that does, I think it's called Walk It Off or something. And I think they have a female in the men's group that meet it around Terrible. But all these amazing groups that offer that support, so even if you don't want to take that big steps, it's really scary going, hey, I'm going to go to a counselor and be vulnerable, just to go to one of these groups and just have someone going through similar circumstances. Because often what that would do is that would stop you taking it out against your ex. Having someone talk to you might stop that angry text message, which might be interpreted as a threat, which could lead to videos and everything down the track. It is really good to have that place, a safe place where you can vent or talk to similar people.
Yeah, and even a lot of those events, you don't even necessarily need to talk to people. It is a good way just to unwind. Like I did the breathwork session and an ice bath with Talk to Me, Bro. And I've done a few of their sessions that were like that, and they're just so nice and calming. And it was a perfect way to start your weekend. And you don't need to talk to anyone. A few times, the first time I went to one, I'm like, oh, this is weird. I'm going into my own. And I think I was one of the few that turned up on my own. A lot of them were in twos or threes. But it's still, you don't need to worry about that. You're not there for anyone else. You're there for yourself, and you walk out feeling so empowered and so good in yourself.
That's right. Showing up for yourself is so important, especially when you're going through what will no doubtably be one of the worst times in your life.
Yes.
It's going through any kind of the family court system
Yeah.
against such a horrible time. So have that support in place, have your network in place, have that good advice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And so let's talk AVOs. How to navigate those, how do they work when it comes to parenting? Yeah, what advice do you have on dealing with AVOs in single parenting?
so generally there's two types of AVOs. There's an AVO that's brought by police, and there's an AVO that you can apply for the court system yourself.
Okay.
So the biggest thing to remember, if police get involved and police place an AVO on your partner or your ex-partner, as it may be, the matter doesn't become you versus your ex-partner. Okay, it's the police against your ex-partner. So essentially you're removed from the picture there. So when it goes to court, it's your ex-partner against the police. So your ex-partner might come to you and say, you know, you need to change this, you need to drop this AVO, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And often you don't actually have the power to do that. So that's the first point I'll touch on there, because often we find after like an incident of domestic violence or an incident where the police are called and an AVO is brought, the person who committed the act of domestic violence will often think that the victim has the power to change things, and that's not the case. The second thing that's really important, especially in the context of family law with AVOs, is often AVOs will have a no contact order on the AVO. So it might be that, you know, the parties are in a situation where they can no longer contact each other in regard to the children. They can no longer see each other in regard to the children, like or arrange drop-offs or pick-ups or anything like that, you know, which is really, really hard to navigate. You know, there's ifs or buts or anything like that. You need to abide by the AVO.
Okay. So there's no contact with the kids at all, as you're just
Well,
saying.
if the kids are listed as one of the protected people in the AVO, then and there's a no contact order on there, because the AVO can have, you know, sometimes just one order, sometimes two different orders, three.
Okay.
The AVO. But if there's a no contact order and the kids are listed as a protected person, then yes, the offender or the defendant cannot contact the children on that, you know, unless through a lawyer or unless there might be a prescribed way in which that contact can occur on the AVO. So it needs to be abided by. Whatever the orders are, it needs to be abided by. However, in saying that, in the context of family law, often you can imagine this arises quite a fair bit. So just to give an example, you might have mum and dad. Mum has an AVO against dad that has a no contact order in it. But the parents still have to co-parent. The kids are still going back and forth between the houses in a week about arrangement, for example. Now, dad's in a pretty hard spot because, you know, let's say that little Johnny breaks his leg with dad. You know, dad can't contact mum to let mum know, hey, I've got to go to
Ah, so even in that situation, they couldn't.
100, it's a no contact, so you can't contact unless through lawyers, unless through, and the ABO will literally say on it, like unless through lawyers, unless through a court-ordered service, or it could be as directed. So sometimes it might say unless through the maternal grandparents or something like that. Now, the best way, if you find yourself in that situation and you just have a parenting plan, for example, is to get some kind of family law court orders in place that allow for contact. So, you know, you'd obviously speak to your lawyer about it, whether it's appropriate in the circumstances, but you might reach an agreement and get consent orders, which is an agreement by consent, which the courts approve. Which allows for contact. So the courts will acknowledge that the AVO is in place, but they might do an order that the parties can communicate in regard to the children only through a parenting app. So that could be one useful way to go through.
Okay.
The other option is looking at getting an AVO varied down the track, which to remove certain orders, you know, like a no contact order, just for the purposes of contacting in regards to the children. But in the family law scope of things, you know, sometimes having them consent orders in place, allowing for contact, acknowledging that there is an AVO in place, is the best way to go there. But it's definitely something that depends on the individual circumstances, whether there were charges laid and everything else.
Yeah, okay. So how do you find, I mean, I know this is probably going to vary across the board and stuff, but how do you find when there are AVOs, does parenting still continue as normal? Do most people
It
usually try to
depends.
hold off?
Honestly, it depends on the parties, like sometimes, like in DV, like
Yeah.
it's one of the areas I work in quite a fair bit, but it could be a matter in which an AVO was put in place because the parents, had a terrible argument. It might have been a one-off incident, which doesn't excuse it at all. However, an AVO is put in place, but both parents still acknowledge that, the children are safe with each party. Um,
Mm,
the children are okay to spend time with each party as well, which like creates a situation where the children should still have that time or the pre-time arrangements with each party. So that's not uncommon, I would say. Sometimes AVOs can be used to stop that time, but it all depends
mm,
on circumstances in the event that led to the cause of the AVO. If it's something that, let's say, and I'm going to go the opposite of genders this time, if mum, had a big night out and, got intoxicated and then attacked, the dad, in a fight, she might have an AVO put against her. This could be mum's first night out in 10 years, it
yeah.
could have been completely out of character, and it may have led to the separation, but dad still might acknowledge, hey, you know what, she's a great mum. This event, like this particular event or this circumstance shouldn't affect that
Affect. Yep.
the kids. Yeah. So in that case, they may still have some kind of arrangement in place and with the children, and it may still work well. But it's just navigating how to continue with the no contact orders.
So what happens in the opposite situation of that? So dad was, quite cooperative in that scenario that you just said there, and he was saying, she's a good mum, she just had a bad night. What happens when it's a complete opposite, where they're just like, no, I don't want to borrow this, I don't want you around the kids anymore?
Again, it falls down to, if the children are listed on the AVO as needed to be protected as well. So if the incident involved the children, if the children aren't listed on an AVO, it puts mum in a difficult position. And like, let's say dad has the care of the children, dad says, no, you're not getting the kids back. Unfortunately, there's only one place it's going to end up, and that's going to be court. Like in that situation, obviously mum's stuck because she can't contact dad to arrange any time with the
Ah,
kid.
yeah,
It's probably going to go to the school and say, I've got this AVO in place, I need, so she's going to find herself in a hard position. So in that case, I would definitely recommend speaking to a lawyer and
yeah.
starting the process of getting some kind of negotiation or agreement in place in regards to the children, and also like some kind of consent orders in place. But there are things you can do too, like, and I'm a lover of all courses. If you find yourself in a situation where you may have acted in a way that's out of character, or you may have acted in a way that, you felt like you were pushed to the point of no
Yep.
return, and we can make, a ton of excuses, for why this happened. But the reality of it is it did happen.
Yeah.
You can't really turn back time. But what can you do now to better yourself? To better your chances? Go do some courses, go do anger management courses. There's great female anger management courses, there's a men's behavior change program, there's a ton of things you can do, circular security, everything else. Learn about why you did what you did. You can't change the past, but you can change
Yeah.
the future. Become that better person, because not only will you pick up the most amazing tools from these courses, but the courts will look highly on anyone that, has put in the effort to make these changes to themselves too.
Yeah.
And be beneficial to your case, like your family law matter,
Yeah.
as well as yourself. You're going to grow as a person. The past doesn't define you. It's what you do in
No.
the future that's going to define.
Exactly. The sad thing is, though, with that, like so many people hold on to that victim mentality. I don't need help. I don't need improving. It's all their fault. They pushed me to this point, or they, what's the word? I've just forgot the word, where they antagonize you, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah,
They were
and so
at me. They were at me. They were at me. Like,
yeah,
but it still happened. It doesn't matter. What led to it. The fact of the matter,
you did
that's
it.
what happened.
Yeah.
Like Not a, we're all human, we're all going to screw up. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to have, moments where we want to scream and shout and cry and do all that. And that's
Yep.
okay. It's
Yep.
okay to be human. But what's not okay is to sit here and go, you know what? It's not my fault. I'm not going to do anything about it.
Yep.
Pick yourself up and go become the best version of yourself so you can be the best parent for your kids.
Exactly. And because let's be honest, when you're going through this, you're not going to handle things in the best way. You're going to
No.
have your shit days where you're just going to want to erupt and you're just going to vent it all out on your ex or say something or do something stupid. We've all
Yeah.
probably had those moments because you're going through this really shitty part of your life and you just don't know how to handle it in the moment. And we all react, and that's okay. It's not okay to react badly, but it is normal. It's a normal part of life. We don't always know how to handle things in the best way, but it's not okay to sit there in, misery lane and blame someone else the whole time either.
That's exactly right. And you're right, like it doesn't matter who you are in your circumstances, like everybody goes through it. Like I remember like sitting in the rain on the front of my driveway, just sobbing for an hour and, like
Oh,
wanting to scream and doing everything else like that, and that was like one of the worst points for me. Like I couldn't move. Like I was rocking in a ball, an absolute mess at the very height of my separation. And I look back now and go, wow, but it's okay to reach rock bottom as
yep.
well. It is okay. And to acknowledge that too, like not stick your head in the sand and not try to give up on your kids and go, you know what, they're better off without me. No, they're not. They're not better off
No,
without you.
no.
You don't have to fight necessarily like fight to get them, but
Be
just
present.
yeah, be present. You should always try and better yourself to be that best person for them. You're
Yep.
not in competition or you're not fighting your ex, like you're fighting yourself. That's what it boils down to,
Yep.
and often, like we are so defensive on anything that's put forward. We are so defensive. Like if someone tells you, oh, maybe you should do a parenting course or this course would be really good. I'm not a bad parent.
Yep.
It doesn't mean you're a bad parent. Go do the course. Like
Yep.
I'm a family law solicitor. I've done that many courses, and I think I'm a half decent mum. Like I'm pretty active in my kids' lives. But I love a good parenting course, and I'll
Yep.
never any chance I can take to improve myself as a parent and as a person too. It's fantastic. Never turn down any of them opportunities
Yep.
because it's going to benefit yourself. And like I said, your matter ends up in a family court situation, which I hope it doesn't, any bits of paper you can have to say, hey, I've tried.
I've done
I've
this.
really
Yep.
tried. I've
Yep.
done this. I'm really doing my best to work on myself. The courts are only going to look at that in a favorable light.
Yep. And that applies so much with what I do. I've had so many people say, why would I need a single parent coach? Why do I need to speak to someone like you for? It's, I'm not here to tell you what to do and what not to do. It's to help you to get to a better place because clearly you're not at the moment. And that's okay. Like you were just saying before about hitting rock bottom. Do you know what? I think rock bottom is a great place to be because I've been there. And you know what? I don't think I'd be where I am now if I didn't hit that rock bottom. And rock bottom is your place of, it's like your aha moment. It's like, you know what? Shit, I need to change something here.
That's right. And there's only one place you can go when you hit rock bottom,
Exactly. Yep.
you know. And having someone like you too to help navigate through them things, like someone that's aware of what's around, these courses, these resources, and everything else,
Yep.
like, and just to acknowledge that, hey, you know what, it's okay. It's
Yep.
okay to be down there, have your day where you're just going to sit in your jammies and eat chocolate and just cry in front of the TV. But tomorrow's a new day,
Yeah.
back
Yeah. Do
up.
that, but just don't stay there.
Yes, yes,
Yep.
100%.
Yep. All right. So let's talk kind of leading off what we were just talking about with AVOs. So from that next step, you'd probably go into maybe supervised visits.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. You probably get a lot of people that get scared off by that term, or maybe just, don't want to touch it at all. What's your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Like, there is and we talk about these stigmas. There's such a stigma associated with supervised time or supervised visits, because as a parent, especially when you've been in a situation where you may have, cared for your child while, dad went to work, or you may have had all that normal time with your child, and all of a sudden you've gone through this separation. And you're deemed to be not able to care for your child alone. It can be really insulting.
Yep.
You're like, I used to watch this kid at night time. I used to, change nappies, bath the child, feed the child. I've done all this, and now you're telling me I need to be supervised. it can feel like such an attack at your
Yeah.
parents. Prior to this separation, you were doing all that anyway. I would say it's actually not a bad thing, especially for a parenting case. So supervised visits are, what they sound like. They're visits that are supervised
Yeah.
and often supervised in a professional basis. I think Relationships Australia do them. There's also a lot of private supervision services around. Now, what happens is you'll go into one of these centres or wherever it may be, and you'll have someone there supervising the time that you spend with your child. Now, they're going to be there with their little pen and paper. They're not going to interfere, but they're going to be making notes. Now, them notes are fantastic evidence. You rock up with some healthy snacks, you rock up looking well dressed, you play with your child, you read them a book, you do all the things you used to do because you know what? You're probably doing awesome. The supervisor's going to record all that. And that's great evidence in your parenting case, in your parenting. You rock up to the court with these reports and saying that, hey, Sarah brought her child, carrot sticks and strawberries. They had fun. They had a wrestle on the grass. She changed the nappy appropriately. She did all this kind of stuff. The court's going to go, great, fantastic. Well,
There's
let's
no
move on.
issues. Yep. Yep.
As it can be such a bitter pill to swallow and it can be such a hard thing, but we need to change that stigma around it. If having supervised time and accepting that is better than having no time.
Yep.
Because often you might have supervised time for a period of 3 months or whatever the time may be. And then you'll have these fantastic reports and then you move to unsupervised time as opposed to going, you know what, I'm not accepting that. I'm going to keep fighting it. And you might fight for a period of 6 months with having no time at all. And by that stage where you've had no time for 6 months, the courts are likely to order, especially for younger children, supervised time anyway, because that's a long time for a child to be without a parent, and the child's probably going to feel uncomfortable or nervous about being in that parent's company again.
Yeah.
So if you get offered supervised time, it may be a good idea to go down that path just to get some runs on the board, get them positive reports in, and then it may save you, 6 months in time without seeing your child.
So if you walked into a supervised visit being angry at your ex and being angry that you've got to be there for a supervised visit and being angry at that whole situation, that's clearly not going to work in your favor then, is it?
No, that's right. You don't want to sit there and, badmouth your ex to the supervisor and say things like, oh, I can't believe he's making me do this. He was so controlling, rah, because the notes are going to be, the parent barely spent time with the child.
Yeah.
They take note of everything you say. They take note of all the little things you mention. Okay. And again, it's that mindset. It's really, really hard. And I don't take that away. I can't even imagine how difficult knowing that, you've cared for your child up to this point of separation and often alone, to then be forced to be watched. It's not, we've got to move away from the view that it's a judgment of your parenting. You've just got to form the view that, hey, this is going to give me the extra evidence I need to show the court by a professional that I'm capable of doing these
That's
things.
a good point. And I don't think many people would look at it like that. They just think, well, I shouldn't have to do that. Why should I? But that's a good way to look at it. This is going to get me what I want.
Yeah. You can't change the system, but you can work with it. What can you do to work with it to make your matter not drag out for the next 5 years? What can you do? Sometimes you have to swallow these bitter pills in the short term to get a really good long-term result.
And that's the hard part when you're going through a breakup, biting your tongue at those times. And so you just mentioned then about dragging the process out. So let's talk about that a little bit when you're going through a breakup with, not just custody, but like with settlement and everything. And that whole process is just getting dragged out. Do you have any tips to avoid that?
Again, having a good lawyer on board, unfortunately there are some lawyers, and we're pretty lucky on the coast because it doesn't often happen on the coast. There are some lawyers that do tend to drag out matters because it's financially beneficial.
Yeah.
And also, other parties, may be beneficial for the other party to drag out the matter too because they're residing in the house. Having a good lawyer on board that knows what you want and knows the path and the steps to get there. There should be timeframes put on everything, because with property settlement in particular, there's steps that need to be taken. So there needs to be financial disclosure, which is like the showing of all the bank accounts, showing getting houses valued and figuring out what exactly is in the property pool. and things like that. These processes can drag out, especially if the other party is unwilling to step up and do things on time or in a timely nature. And it's fair enough too, because some parties just put their heads in the sand. They don't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
Going through the mourning process as well. So it's a lot to take into account there. If you're the one that's left the relationship, you might be ready to go, boom, let's get this done. I want this done. I want this dusted.
Yeah, with the other person, not so much.
You need
Yeah.
to. Another really good thing too is setting yourself realistic timeframes. It's if you can resolve your financial settlement in a period less than a year, you're doing well.
Yeah. Okay.
You need to not go in, okay, you know what, we've reached an agreement, because often your agreement that you reach may be an agreement in your head, but the other party is umming and ahhing and they'll pull out. The tiniest little thing can make someone decide they don't want to go ahead with it, and that's going to set you back another 6 months.
Yeah.
If you're going through any kind of, property settlement, if you allow yourself and get used to the time frame of, hey, you know what, this is probably going to take up to 2 years, maybe longer, then anything earlier is a bonus, but you have to sort of step up to and be willing to negotiate. But having a good lawyer that will talk you through the steps too, and it's always useful. And sometimes you just have to accept that you may need to go to court as well. A lot of people will avoid court, which is a good thing to do generally. But if this matter is dragging out, for a period of a year and a half and you've gotten nowhere, it's gotten to you have to file, like you've got to go to court to get this matter sped up a little bit, because otherwise it's going to continue to drag out.
Yeah. So that's quite often the scenario when these things do take so long. You've either got a lawyer that's just trying to milk it for their benefit, or you've got someone that's just not in the right headspace and they're just not emotionally ready to deal with it at that time. Yeah. So in that scenario, would you advise someone to actually speak one-on-one with their ex, or would you say, no, it's best just to go through the lawyer the whole time?
Honestly, it depends on your relationship that you have with them. I have some wonderful clients that come in and they have a really amicable relationship where they're able to go, you know what, this is our situation, or we've negotiated, or especially if they're mindful of the costs that lawyers are charging, then if they come back to me and go, we've reached an agreement, that's great. If you can negotiate and be reasonable, but you can't expect the other party to agree with what you're saying too.
No, exactly.
Negotiate them. There's so much distrust, in separation, and sometimes you need a lawyer there to sort of be impartial and take away the hurt and everything else, and also advise you on what to do. If you can resolve it yourself, great. Okay, that is fantastic. But you have to just bear in mind that it being resolved in your head may not follow through to the other party eventually agreeing.
Yeah.
They speak to their lawyer, or their lawyer might say it's a terrible deal. I have clients come into me, for example, that say, oh, we're just going to divide the house. I'm not going to touch her super, because that was her super. And I'll say, that's terrible advice, and I'm not trying to drag it out, but I'm also going to let them know what they're entitled to, as well.
Yeah.
So it is a fine balance. And in the end, you need to make a decision that's beneficial for you in your circumstances, because in the end, no matter what advice you're given, your circumstances better than anyone else, and you're going to have to live with your decision. Take all on board and make your decision.
Yeah. So really, at the end of the day, there's no negative impact that's going to come of you wanting to maybe talk to your ex one-on-one and try and resolve it quicker between the two of you whilst you're going through the legal process, that is.
There's not. I guess you just have to be mindful in how you're doing it. Like if you're forceful, swearing or, aggressive.
Of course. Yeah. That's going to make it worse.
Yeah, exactly. Like meet in a public place, like that's, if you're going to talk to someone and it's been a bit of a rocky relationship, public place where there's, people around, where there's, a cafe, go get a coffee and just have a chat.
Yeah.
Or some cameras, somewhere that, it's not going to erupt in an argument or anything else like that. It can be done, like negotiations can be done, but you just got to remember that your idea of what's fair, and this is what we talked about earlier, may not be their idea of what's fair. Your idea of, hey, I worked hard for all my super, shouldn't have to give him any of my super. It may not be actually fair because he was unable to work because he was looking after the children.
Yeah.
So you just have to be mindful. So if you go see a lawyer for an initial advice, a lawyer can give you a pretty good idea of where you might stand. based on what you've told them in the property settlement. So they'll mention things like, hey, you might want to look at super. This is a reasonable amount to put forward. Be reasonable. You want to get this done and you want to save, $30, $50, $100,000 in lawyers' fees. Be reasonable. It doesn't have to be fair, but you should be reasonable.
Yeah. Okay. So going off on that in a little bit, what do you do in the situation where you're still living together and maybe one person's refusing to leave, or you're staying there till the divorce, or whatever reason it is? But you do see it quite often where maybe one person's refusing to leave until settlement's done. What advice do you have for people in that scenario?
It's a really, really hard one. Like I have, there seems to be this thought attached that you should stay living in the house,
Yeah.
get your fair share. It's not really the view that the courts will take. So if you've got a house there and both parties are living in it, and one party decides to move out, that doesn't lessen their interest in that property.
Okay. I think a lot of people think that.
Yeah, no, because the courts will look at the assets as a whole and go, okay, well, these assets need to be divided one way or another.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I will never encourage a client to stay in a house where it's detrimental to their mental health. Okay? Because if you're in that situation where, you're constantly fighting, it's walking on eggshells, it's a
Exactly.
horrible situation. That's where we find it leads to, situations of domestic violence, of arguments, of AVOs that just complicate everything so much
Yeah.
worse.
And it's not healthy for the kids
No,
either.
it isn't. Right. And that should be the primary consideration. Like if you have the ability to move somewhere else, for example, you might go, okay, well, I can go stay with my mum, but dad's okay there with the kids, take it. Like if you need to do that, do it, or work out some other arrangement where you can sort of work together in that regard. But you don't necessarily need to be under the same roof to get things done.
In saying that though, I think this is probably another factor that comes in why people don't leave. So if one parent did leave and left the kids there in the house with the other parent, would that affect their custody arrangement?
Depends on how long they left for. So if they're left for a long period of time to the point where the other parent became the primary carer, it could have an impact on it. However, if they just needed to get away for a weekend and then came back, because that's the other thing too you've got to consider. So if you have both parents in the title of the house, one parent could go away, you could change the locks of the house. Then other people will come in and essentially, break a window of the house and come into the house. Which we obviously wouldn't recommend, but because they're on the title of the house, they're damaging their own property, so it's a really difficult one to think about and decide. And again, it all depends on the circumstances of the matter and what happens afterwards, and whether you're able to have a parenting plan in place or some kind of parenting arrangement in place. You might move out for 2 weeks to get yourself set up somewhere else and then go, okay, I'm ready for the kids now too. It's always just best to think about what is in the best interest of the kids.
Yeah.
Or there. If you might have a situation where one party is refusing to leave the house, which I think you talked about earlier. So you can actually, if you're going through the court process, you can get orders in place for sole occupancy, which is where one party has to leave the house and one party can stay in the premises or stay in the house until the final orders are made with regard to financial settlement.
Yeah, okay. So if one parent was to leave with the kids, and that wouldn't have an impact on them, or like it wouldn't, like they're taking their kids away from the other parent, for example, that wouldn't have a negative impact.
It depends. Again, it's
okay.
So like if they're leaving to go and they go, you know what, I'm going to take these kids and I'm going to go to mum's in Queensland, then yes, it could be seen to have a negative impact, okay? Because again, it depends on the circumstances. They got to Queensland, they actually might be ordered to come back down, and relocate back to the Central Coast. So it's always good to make sure you speak to someone before you take them steps and figuring out what you're doing there. That I would never ever recommend staying in a situation though if you're unsafe. It's if you're scared, if you're worried about the children, never ever remain in that house.
Yeah.
In the case that we do have a lot of resources as well. Again, like what you're doing in the short term doesn't have to define the long-term situation too. So for example, if you take the kids away for the week, it doesn't mean that you're going to have them full time. You may reach some kind of arrangement after that.
Yeah. Another topic, when they just don't come to an agreement on custody.
Yeah. Well, it's really hard, and you're not gonna to find parents that are actually going to agree on the care
Yeah.
arrangements, like look at the care arrangements as opposed to custody as such. It's really hard to reach an agreement on that, because we go from a situation where we're essentially around our kids 24/7 or around our kids all the time, and all of a
Yep.
sudden that time's being taken away.
Yep.
If you don't reach an agreement, obviously the first step is to go to a mediation where you can talk about what works for you both.
Yep.
There's certain things that the courts will take into consideration. One of the big things is the age of the children too. Okay, so depending on how old the children are, the courts may not deem it suitable for overnights. For like if you've got a 6-month-old baby, for example, that's breastfed, the courts may go, you know what, it's really not best for this child to go with dad overnight for long periods
Yeah, of course. Yep.
when that primary attachment is there and they're breastfed and everything else. So what arrangements can you have? And that's why the younger the children are, it's best to have some kind of fluid arrangements.
Yep.
You also need to really consider what works for you. If it's not going to work for you as a parent, you're going to put yourself in a situation where you're that stressed out, that burnt out, that any time that you have with the kids is going to be not enjoyable. You're going to be snapping, you're going to be cranky. They're going to go back to the other party and go, I hate going to mum's because she's cranky, or I hate going to mum. If you just, work the whole time while I was there, you need to make it work for you. It's not a competition on who can have the kids more.
Yeah.
It's not a competition on, hey, well, we should have them 50-50 because it's fair. Make it work for you.
Yeah, 100%.
Be flexible with the other party. If they're working on weekends, it may not be suitable for them to have them on weekends. You don't have to follow some sort of guide. Just make it work for both of you and have that flexibility.
Yeah. And you see that a lot. I'm going to fight for 100%. And I just think to myself when I see that, well, you're going to regret that. Because in the moment you don't want to give up your kids. That's like you've been with them every single day of their life, and then you're in a stage where you're just going through all this, and then you've also got to hand over your kids to add salt to the wounds that you're already going through. And so people get in that headspace. I'm not giving up my kids. I'm going to fight for the 100% of the time. But in the long run, you need that break. You don't see it in that moment, but later down the track, you're going to be thinking to yourself, shit, I need a break. I need some time to myself. And for some reason, they just insist on fighting that other parent to get more custody or to get any custody. And they think they just want to be involved just for child support or just not to pay child support or something like that. It's just, why not just let them be involved?
That's right. Exactly. And we have this big thing about, my rights, they're my children. And we talked about before, they're my children. It's my right. The Family Law Act actually talks about the rights of the child, not the rights of mum, not the rights of dad, but the rights of the child. And the rights of the child to have all these people in their lives and to know their history, know their culture, and have them relationships, as long as they're safe, obviously, with all these amazing people that they have in their life. So you really have to switch your mindset as well and go, what's best for the child? What's in the best interest of the child? Is it really best that, I stop mum seeing the child, because I don't really like her? Or is it really best I stop dad seeing the child because, hey, his new girlfriend was my best friend in high school, and I'm really cranky about that. It's you really have to bring it right back down to what's best for the kids when you're doing an arrangement. And it is really hard. It is so hard to work on that, and it gets easier as the kids get older because it's going to come a stage where, your kids aren't going to want to hang with you. They're not going to want to hang with their dad. They're going to want to go off their mate. So
and then you get to a space, it's like, oh, what do I do now? I'm lonely. But when you get to that place when you're used to co-parenting back and forth, you're okay with that alone time. That's okay. So let's wrap it up. I know we've gone a bit longer, but I could just talk for hours on this topic. So is there anything else you want to add to this for anyone that's going through a breakup? Any last minute tips or advice that you would like to share?
Yeah, I guess the big thing is be gentle on yourself. It is an awful, awful situation to go through, and you're going to feel hurt and you're going to want to get back with them. You're going to feel guilty. You're going to question yourself. You're going to just, mourn the future you didn't have. It's a horrible horrible time to go through.
It is.
What you will get through it.
Yep.
Get some good advice, go see a lawyer, even for an hour. You don't have to use lawyers throughout your case, but get some good advice so you know your position in regards to everything. If you go down the lawyer path, find a lawyer that fits you as well, because you're going to be sharing these intimate moments with your lawyer that you haven't told your mom, you haven't told your best friends, you're going to be sharing everything with them. So find someone that fits you, and again, we're lucky on the coast. We've got so many beautiful lawyers that are here. The second thing is, do the courses. You're not a bad parent by doing a parenting course. You're an awesome parent by doing the parenting course. Triple P parenting courses are free.
Yes. Yep.
All online too. Circle of Security are great as well. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable with your ex as well. Don't always have your guard up, because if you're constantly having your guard up, you're just going to be defensive, and it's just going to create a cycle. Be vulnerable and say, hey, you know what? Can we work on an arrangement? Like, I'm trying to juggle work and everything.
Yep.
The kids to sport.
Yep.
Allow them the opportunity to be involved, because if you're not allowing them the opportunity to be involved, you can't really complain when they're not. It's just letting your guard down and realizing that, hey, as a single parent, you're a single parent. Your ex is a single parent too, so join together as single parents and go, let's work through this to do everything in the best interest.
And that's one thing I say all the time. They're not in your life for you anymore. They're in your life for your kids, and that's what you've got to keep the focus on. They're not there to make your life a living hell or, to suck all your bank accounts dry. They're there for your kids, and you've got to make it work for them.
100%. And no one, I use that mantra as well, no one's going to love your kids as much as your ex, it's just, they're the only other person in the world that's going to care about your kids as much as you do. Sometimes they don't, because their parenting style is completely different to yours, but they are the only other person in the world that's going to love your kids as much as you do and would lay down their life for it.
Yeah. And it's hard because you've got everything. It's not just one thing. You've got the breakup, and then you've got the settlement, and then you've got the divorce and the custody, and you've got everything. And then the next minute they've got a new partner and you're dealing with that. So you're dealing with all these huge emotions all at once, and then trying to make all these big decisions. It's a lot. So it's so important to really just step back and just process everything and just get some good advice from someone like yourself, or someone, with a good legal background, or some support from someone like myself as well. So it is a lot, and don't be hard on yourself. Definitely.
Yeah. Find your village, find your people.
Yes.
Get through it.
Yes, definitely. All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to wrap it up today, and I hope you all got something amazing from this episode. There's a lot of information on this, and thank you. And until next week, I'll be in your ears then.
Thank you for tuning in today's episode. That was a big one with lots of information you can take away. And I hope you got some valuable information that you can use for your situation. Now, just a reminder, Krystal's details are in the show notes below. So if you are wanting to have a chat to her, jump on. Her details are there. You can have a quick 15-minute chat and go through some of those nitty-gritty questions that you may have. I've also got my details in the show notes. So if you are at a place where you're needing to get in a better headspace before you go through the legal system, or if you're just needing some extra support, then jump on. I've got all my sessions available there. Plus, I've got some new group sessions available, which are an amazing way to also hear the stories of other people, and it's a little bit of a cheaper price point if you are on the budget, but those one-on-one sessions are available, which are a great opportunity for you when you are tackling this legal system before you go through it on your own, and to get you in that better headspace before you get started. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming back week after week. It does mean so much. And if you are loving the show, don't forget to give a review or share it with your single parent friends, because that means so much to me, to getting the word out there and helping our other single parent friends in our community. So let's get the word out there. Give me a little review, or just share it with someone that you know that can help them. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the Life After Plus One podcast. If you loved what you heard today and looking for some further support, then jump onto our website, lifeafterplusone.com. Plus, don't forget to check out our Instagram page for further resources and inspo. You can find all the links in the show notes. And remember, you're not alone on this path. I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next episode. And in the meantime, keep thriving, keep growing, and keep exploring your amazing life after plus one.